Not entirely, because I thought you already told us we couldn't use subjective standards.
Again, if it's an all residential project,
Okay, we're speaking
can't.
all residential.
if it's a project that's 51% commercial, you can use subjective standards. But if it's a project that's 51% residential,
Okay,
you cannot.
thanks for clarifying.
All right.
And currently our law is 50/50.
Currently, the law doesn't say 50/50. It currently just says it's a free reign. Oh, well, no, that's gone too. Now it allows for, as it stands today, it allows for upstairs offices to convert. There's no percentage. The only thing it says currently today is you can't convert ground floor to commercial uses to residential. And you can't, and if it's a single story, you can't convert the front facing on the street to residential if it's commercial. Because again, we want to maintain that commercial level.
And that changed in the last 3-4 months, right?
It changed with the zoning ordinance, yeah.
That wasn't what it was for,
Correct, it was a secondary use.
Secondary.
That's what it was before.
which meant it was 49-50%.
Not even that, it was way lower than that.
Well,
It was
wasn't a number of points, it was just secondary, what was secondary?
secondary at the time utilized a formula that basically took into account a percentage of the gross floor area, and it was down to about 20%, give or take, of conversion of commercial. It was a tough formula to even get units in.
And that's why the push was to go to 40 units.
That's correct.
The idea to allow the owner to build or rebuild or retroactively change his property to more than 50% residential and then the rest office, and still have subjective standards, or vice versa?
So let me get into that for the minute. So the point is, the discussion is, there was no clarification of whether the structure was new or existing, which is why there's the fourth bullet there, which is what city staff has come up with in your staff report. If this, based on this workshop and based on the outcome, if we want to still maintain sort of that subjective control, however, we want to provide flexibility for our existing property owners. And that means they're not going to change the facades. They're just going to, what's called, adaptively reuse their space. Then we could potentially amend zoning ordinance 11.7, which limits 49% of the gross floor area to residential for new structures only. It's almost essentially the best of both worlds, where we advocate for adaptive reuse of our buildings on the second and third floors, but our new structures would be limited to 49% max, which then allows it to be subjective. But we keep our objective design standards because that way it gives them the starting point.
Raphael, so if I'm understanding, is this applicable to the entire Village Design District or those R3 zoned properties within the Village Design District?
Within the entire Village Design District 1.
Thank you.
And you're clarifying that this is for new structures only? We are not talking about the renovations that are kind of now gaining momentum in Solvang?
If we wanted to do bullet point 4, yeah, that would be the carve-out, would be for new structures. So essentially, if someone were to purchase a piece of property and demo it, and they want to put something completely new, they would be forced to, at least if we amended it, only 49% could be residential uses.
It would be forbidden to go above that? You said only 49% could be for residential?
Correct, of the gross floor area.
If you put 51% residential, what would happen?
Couldn't do it.
Then the design standards don't apply in the same way. Is that correct?
Yes,
Yeah.
so it's subjective.
Right.
So it comes to the DRC, it can go back and forth in terms of how we want it to look and feel, et cetera. Does that make sense? I know it's
Yeah.
extremely complicated, and I get there's a ton of nuances here.
What's wrong with having it build 55% residential and having it go to the DRC?
You can't.
You
Can't.
can't under state law.
The problem is that residential, we're short. The state of California has demanded whatever we've got to do. They foist it upon cities. You know all that. And so what one of theirs is to say that you have to, if it's a residence, you can't go to the DRC and let them design it willy-nilly, subjectively. You must be very objective. So what we were trying to carve out was a way to go, well, how much of that could be residential so the DRC could still be subjective to some level? And it came up with, we're hoping, our attorneys have thought, that 5149. So if the residential is subjective to the commercial, DRC would have control over the design more than if it was the other way around, because the state doesn't care about commercial. So that's where 50-50, the state has, or our attorneys have decided 50-50 is not good enough. You got to go 51-49.
51 commercial, 49.
Correct. And then DRC would have more say over what the design is.
And there aren't necessarily concessions that have to be made as well.
Well,
I think,
it depends. I mean, that's another
Yeah,
thing.
it's
That's
a
a
whole
whole,
nother
we're not
zone
talking
thing.
about
Okay,
that.
that's
Yeah.
another.
We just want to just
okay.
keep it to this subset
Design
here.
only, yes.
All right.
So, and again, maintaining the objective standards, because we want those, as mentioned, as, you know, we pulled it on the R3. If we kept the look, we got to keep the standard. But again, I think the biggest concern from reviewing the video and listening to the comments of both the DRC, the Planning Commission, some of their comments here from public speakers, is having that control for the new buildings. Because that was a concern. What if someone purchases a piece of property and demos it? Now what? So this allows sort of that carve out to happen. So I got a poll. Let's run it.
Can I ask one quick question to clarify, because I'm a little bit confused on this?
Yeah.
Wouldn't there be another alternative to come up with an objective standards that actually are referenced by the DRC, that actually create design handbooks that apply both to the commercial and the residential within the village, and then bypass the percentages?
We'll get there.
Okay.
It's the devil's in the details. Yeah.
Raphael.
Correct.
So what you don't want, you don't want somebody saying, I'm gonna convert my residential to 90% commercial and 10% residential. You don't want that to happen, because that puts all of the commercial by state law into the objective category, and you lose your ability to control.
It is, kind of. But again, it goes back to the question of, we want to at least based on the general plan, based on the infill, based on the polys, you want to advocate infill development. You essentially want to advocate adaptive reuse. So we're talking Frederick's Court, existing building. They want to take their upstairs and they want to convert those to residential units, but not touch the outside. Do we want that to be okay?
Sounds like you would. Sounds good.
So, hence why the carve out, and hence why the carve out. So, the next question is, other thoughts on objective design standards?
You described a scenario involving demolition and new construction.
Correct.
Can you describe a similar scenario of a modification to an existing building?
So currently, the way it's written today, it basically, if it's 500 square feet or over, it's got to go to DRC. So we actually do have a case right now. There's an application that's in process where that exactly does happen, where an applicant is not looking to change anything on the existing, but looking to add a building. So that building now is kicking into our objective design standards, which now gives us the ability to say, hey, look, you got to meet this standard. And we can keep kicking you down the can until you meet the standard and at least bring it back to the DRC for that building only. So as is written today, it's already started to practice, and we do have a specific application where that came in, and luckily that was written in. But we can always drop that threshold of 500 square feet if we so choose to, which is why this slide is up, because it's what are those other thoughts? I know that was sort of that main question at the last meeting during the second reading was that question. But again, it's the whole point of having objective standards is giving people a start. You got to tell them where to start. And for the longest time, we've had this 1989 design guideline that has a couple shoulds and maybes and we prefers. But if there's an actual design element that we want to see, just tell them.
When you say, okay, over 500 square feet, then it has to go to DRC.
Correct.
Is that agree? And meet the standards you said. Which ones, objective or subjective?
The objective.
Objective.
They all have to meet the objective standard.
All objective unless it's commercial.
Even then, again, even if it's a new structure, even if it's a new structure, it's still got to meet the minimum objectives design standards. But just because something meets the minimum objective doesn't necessarily mean it looks great, and there could be some issues. Does that make sense?
Well, just to understand, you're talking about subjective and objective standards and saying that, okay, we're bound up by state law.
And again, that's just residential.
Okay, that's what I'm saying.
And we currently, let me explain, we currently have objective design standards. We have a design guideline that's sitting here objective for everything in the DRC or what the TRC is. Absolutely. The residential has to be carved out because these are too subjective. We believe that they've been objective all these years, and we've given them to the DRC and they've interpreted it. We are not only changing and being foisted with the residential to make it very objective, but we're also needing, even in our commercial, to become more objective. These are way too, these have objective things like pitch a roof, very, very objective. But it also has things like, oh, we'd like to see flower boxes on the windows, that'd be encouraged, but the windows should be cut up this size to that size, we think, on that side. And so some of it is very, very subjective, some of it's very, very objective. Rafi's point was we need to become more objective in our commercial, obviously our residential, but in our commercial, we need to become more objective.
Not as objective as residential.
No.
You decide along that gradient, starting with very subjective and absolutely objective.
Devil's in the detail. That's exactly it. That's what this meeting and maybe another meeting is all about, is to, do we first off want to do that? I think most people in the city think we should review it. It's healthy, and we need to look at it to give developers or people more of a guideline that they have some objective. But do you allow then DRC to have some subjective, not in the residential, but in the commercial? Absolutely. Other people feel differently. Some people think, oh no, make it all objective. We don't even need a DRC. Even in the commercial, some people think we should throw this out and let them decide every single time. So you got extremes, you got something in the middle. We'll probably land in the middle. That's what I would think.
Well, and
Sorry, go ahead.
well, I think too that what happens is that we definitely, I think the design review committee, and it's a new group except for me now, but in the past we felt a strong need to have objective standards in place. That said, an applicant can meet all of the objective standards, and that doesn't make for a cohesive whole that fits within the environment that it's placed. There's so many nuances to this. So to at least begin with objective standards to help the applicant, because we've seen too many instances where we've sat up here and it's like, well, just tell us what color. And that is not what we want to be doing, nor should we be doing. We want the applicants to have a good, solid starting place. It also, that would enable staff to direct the applicant to refine their application before it comes before the committee if there's big exceptions. And if the applicant chooses not to do so, well, then they come up before the body that will give them feedback and make hopefully advice.
I understand what you're saying, and I think I understand. You start with the objective standards. If someone walks in and has the plans on and they meet the objective standards, that's great because it gives you a start. And to me, as a citizen, the purpose of the DRC that's very important is to get the applicant to do more, not require him to do more, but to jawbone and talk, because a lot of the architects and the people who come before the DRC, as I've experienced it, is that they're willing to do more if they're shown why that's important and how you feel. Not demanding it, not requiring it, but, or you require the minimum objective, and you say, but do you think you could change this over here because it would look a whole lot better in our view, in the environment, and they might say, yeah, we can do that.
Yeah, and many have been, yeah.
So that means, to me, it seems like that's a really important reason to keep
Yeah.
the DRC in place.
All right, so we're not discussing dissolution of the DRC, so I just want to put that out the table. I do want to say one thing, and then I want to get more comments from before moving on from the commission and then anybody else here in the audience. But with that being said, one thing to keep in mind is, while that's a comment is great comment, as I've said before in many meetings with people want certainty. I want certainty in the stock market. That's just me. But you know, it's people want certainty. When you go to the grocery, you want to know, grocery store, you want to know salad's going to cost you $4. It's the same thing with construction. As a matter, it means more in construction design than anything else. Property owners, developers, who have you, doesn't matter who you are. If you own a piece of property here, the last thing you want to come to a counter and say you want to do an addition for, you want to do a workshop. Well, you know, I don't really know about the colors and maybe here. That's not certainty. So if it's something that we want, rather than if it's a demand, just if it's something that we want as a standard, make it a standard. And then if they need to ask for an exception, then they can most certainly ask for an exception. But if it's something that you want as a standard, make it a standard. Call it a day and make it a standard. And that gives developers certainty. That gives a developer or property owner the ability to properly guide a timeline that says, I will be in and out of entitlement between 6 and 9 months. Versus, well, I got to come back for one meeting, and then I come back for another meeting, and then I got to come back for another meeting.
And one more point to that, it also makes everybody treated pretty equally.
Yes.
Because the worst thing is that why'd you approve that, but you didn't approve this? You don't like me, you like her. You didn't
Right.
like them. And you get that. And all the time, the DRC is, I was on DRC for 10 years, and now I'm on planning for 10 years. And DRC is so subjective over the years, it's been really difficult, and then people are treated unfairly, and rightfully so.
Yeah, the objective standards would give it a much more equitable approach and level the playing field, because we really want the same standard for everybody. And this is the step to get there. I still think eventually we need a little bit more. Right now, we're focusing, I think, on this very specific exception almost
Yes.
to most of the standards because of the zoning of that specific area.
That was the hot button issue at the council meeting, which is why this is the exact
Yeah.
issue. And we'll get a little bit more broad brush in the next topic. So any other comments from commission members and committee members on this topic? Because I you know, again, it sounds like we want to keep the R3 zone in the design district. Nod of heads.
Yes.
Okay. But we want to have a carve out for new structures. So that way we maintain control, but we at least give the infill development a green light for the existing structures that are today. And again, our existing, the new code basically says if you're doing under 500 and if you're doing a bump out for stairs because that's required of you by the code, that's cool. But the minute you start changing colors and changing your facades, you got to go over DRC. So.
Could you explain for us lay people why you wanted R3 in the
That was the first set. We went over that. We
I must
Well,
have missed
the history, real quick, the history on that piece of property, on Copenhagen at that end, you know which ones I mean.
the R3 standard.
Yeah, these are the R3 standards that we're talking about. Those 5-6 lots down there at the end of Copenhagen, they were always in the TRC, tourist-related commercial. They were going to be, because of all Copenhagen is all commercial. Well, back at our last housing allocation, we were short lots. We said, why don't we take those and make them multifamily? We rezoned, but then we did an overlay and say, oh, let's make them R3, but we'll do an overlay where we can do vacation rentals. Okay, now they're really commercial because you can't do a vacation rental at my house or your house, but on those residential, you can. So we carved them out that way. Well, now you got a problem because they're zoned R3, but we wanted them to be, because they can have vacation rentals, under our design review. And this is where we've gotten ourselves in a pickle. We shouldn't have done that. Either we never should have let them have vacation rentals, but we had owners that were there that lobbied and said, this is 10, 15 years ago, golly, they've been commercial and can't I do commercial, I'll just do this. And we had agreed to it. So some of them do it. Some of them rent them out as apartments. And you've got a new development coming in, and I don't know which way they're going to go. That triggered a lot of this discussion on that R3. I don't know how many other, I believe it's the only R3 multifamily zoned in our design DD. It's the only lot. So when we talk R3, we're really only talking about those lots on the west end of Copenhagen, south.
And that allows them to put in a higher density development, but without vacation rental.
Well, that's a whole
yeah, it's a
separate
whole-
subject.
that's-
You've dove into next city council meeting staff report. I don't know what mystery magic sauce you got. I would like some. But that's, Aaron, you've summed up half of my staff report for next city council meeting, and I appreciate that. But there's also a caveat too, is there's a new state law about no net loss. We'll get into that next week. All right, so sounds like we have it. And then to answer your question, in terms of the other areas in the R3 around the city, there's actually, we are required by the state as our housing element to do objective standards for other multifamily zones, R2, R3. The city council, as a part of our budget cycle, actually allocated funds to go get a consultant to go do that. And that would be an open meeting process, et cetera. So that's next on the foray of many things that we are trying to do here to catch us up with state law.
That's new in the zoning, the R3 for the rest of
For the rest of, yes, so that'll be a whole different discussion, but it needs to get done as well, so.
So that's not part of the discussion
No,
tonight.
no, it is not.
Okay.
All right. So now that I got that one out the door, we're going to move on to the next one, and we're going to move on to talk about design handbook. We talked about it very briefly at the city council meeting, but we're going to have a little quiz here. So on your screen, there are 4 images. Which one of these images is compliant with our design guidelines or sign code? So we'll.
Can't tell from my pictures here.
So the first one is a sign that is attached. A is a sign that's attached to our building. Looks like a banner sign. It may be a banner sign, it might not. B is a sign on a roof. Okay. C is a blade sign that it's a hanging blade sign off the sidewalk. And D is one of our storefronts along Copenhagen. So again, which one of these are compliant with our design guidelines? And those design guidelines, Aaron, these guys from 1989, they're still worthy, and then our existing sign ordinance. So let's wrap it up. We have 10. Anybody else? Okay, the answer, none. None. And I'll get into the reasonings why.
I thought,
So, A is a banner sign. We don't allow banner signs. Okay? B, while it is a beautiful sign, we don't allow roof signs.
no.
8, it's a logo sign. However, it's more than 50% of the blade sign, even though it's a great looking logo sign. And D is a projecting sign. It's a sign that hangs out from, sticks out.
So it has to be less than 50% of the length of the blade.
No, the logo. The area of the sign. The logo. There's no business name on it too either. Yep. And number 2 is one from our guidelines. What's wrong with 2? What's wrong with D? Anybody know? No.
Location.
No. That's part of it. No, it's not too big.
I thought it was the location over the window.
Anybody? No. It's missing dividing panes.
Oh, we're talking the window. I thought we were talking signs. Okay.
Wait, are we doing signs? What am I?
We're talking both. I said design guidelines and sign code. I said
Okay.
both. I said
Okay. I
both.
just looked at signs.
Yeah, that's all.
Trick question.
What the heck?
Yes, it divides the window. So see these windows right here? Those have dividing panes.
Multi-pane.
Yeah, multi-pane. Yeah. It requires,
The sign was missing that?
no, not the sign, the window.
He switched subjects on you.
Well, no, it said sign code or design guidelines. All right, so again, as pointed out, we have these design guidelines. They're from the 1990s. They're actually really good. And it was a starting point for a lot of our objective standards, believe it or not. But unfortunately, one, we don't have like an actual digital copy, which kind of a bummer. But two, the idea was to replace it with a handbook. And so the handbook would be updated periodically to conform with state laws and other things as the city council sees fit, or DRC. The biggest one is interpret our objective design standards. So right now they're pretty rudimentary. Again, the whole point was to get something in the books to appease the state of California, as well as sort of make any headway of new buildings in the village. One of the biggest ones and biggest chief complaints we have is, and folks don't know, is we don't have a color palette for the village. Nothing's been adopted. It just, our design guidelines just simply say, needs to be consistent with character. Cool. And so the whole point is to review and gain input. So the idea and ideology is to replace our design guidelines, do this handbook, have it with illustrations, with functional graphics, and then actually truly adopt a starting color palette. Very similar to the objective standards, give people a starting point. And so, because Lisa, how many times do people ask, what do we want to see for colors? Every time. Literally, that is the first question they ask. What color do you want to see? I give them the blank stare. So,
Well, we've talked about this many times. It's like the movie The Pirates of the Caribbean, right? You got the pirate code, and then he answers and goes, well, they're really just guidelines, which means that it really doesn't matter. It can be wishy-washy, and that's what these guidelines are. They need to be codified more significantly so people do know, so Lisa doesn't have to pick the color of every building in town.
right. And even, so that is great. And then at the same token, we have a lot of folks who are upset at some of the color selections that come before the DRC. And we have a public hearing, and no one shows. And they ask why we got these picked, and, well, there's no color palette. So, again, and that's and the point of the color palette is again, it's very similar to objectives, a starting point. And if someone really wants to get out there and have a different color, be our guest, but give us a good reason. Give us a good rhyme and reason and rationale. Present your case. So, if you want to flip over.
Before we
very open-ended
do that,
question.
I have a question
Yeah.
on the colors. Can we limit a color? For example, one of my pet peeves is we have too many buildings where the base color of the building is white. Could we say that no building within X amount of space can be the same color as another building? And make that would that be an objective standard?
Yes.
We can craft it that way.
Yes. So, yeah, but I get concerned about some of that because it's the exception that proves the rule.
Right.
And that's what's so difficult about Solvang. There's so many different buildings, there's so many different owners of facades that are connected on building fronts. There's different locations, as there are in all communities, but we have a really distinctive design style to maintain here. And we do definitely need objective standards. I think everybody's in agreement. I also really encourage staff to maintain the guidelines, although they are certainly not subjective, until the objective standards are in place. And I would like to also encourage that we can start by developing a color palette and not have to do everything else, because we have some excellent tools in place already. We've got, which are, Danish color palettes, which are excellent to start the conversation with. So we don't have to wait for the entire handbook to be complete to get a color palette. That would be my request from the DRC, because the handbook's going to take a while.
And to your point, repainting a building, pretty easy compared to building a new building and what's the
Right.
eave length and what should the window be, that's a
Right.
whole major deal compared to, I'm going to paint, yeah.
It is. So that's why I really feel like we have the tools to pretty quickly come together with a color palette that represents the old world. And that probably needs its own discussion, because there's also, in Copenhagen and Denmark, you've got the old world buildings with new world colors that were colors not obtainable in the old world. Our community, according to our guidelines and what we've been sitting up here doing in the past years, is going with that old world look. And we have defined that in the general plan going forward to kind of specifically, well, generally, I guess you should say, that it's the old world look. So we have to be real careful about that. And there's a misunderstanding at times that the colors that are in certain areas of Copenhagen that are really bright and really colorful, that could never have been obtained in the 1700s. So just thoughts to kind of keep in mind.
I feel like that an important part of the design, especially the colors, is to maintain a sense of cohesiveness. And that is such a subjective term. So you don't want white, but, there's cream, and then there's yellow, and then there's... so that's a real slippery slope as far as creating cohesive values, and yet
Yeah, but that's why I framed it as a percentage of buildings as opposed to, every building in the R3 is going to be painted white with black timbers.
Right.
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 That's
Yeah.
not something we want.
No.
Right. No,
But
I agree.
if we say that white is in our color palette and timbers can be black or brown,
Mm-hmm.
in theory, it could end up that way unless we specify differently.
Right.
Well, I think that's the role of the DRC, in my opinion, in many ways, is that, again, you can meet all the objective design standards, and we can have everything defined. And that still doesn't mean that because you took all these elements that are in the objective standards and put them together, that they make, again, a cohesive whole, or even if they do, but yet how they fit into the environment in which they're placed. And that's impossible to make that an objective standard. And on that black and white thing, in the past years, it's like no black, no white. It was, and that was right, because that was on trend
Very on
in design everywhere, not just in Solvang. That design trend is kind of now fading away, and I think we'll have much less problem or much less requests for that too. But definitely something to consider.
All right. We had a question up, if we have one answer, if you want to. So what would you like to design handbook to include?
Oh, didn't even look.
Checklists and templates? Well, we do have checklists already, so that part's good. Templates, we can figure that out. So I'll give you guys a few moments to provide us some input.
I lost the code. Will you pop the code back up?
If you just go to menti.com and use the code right at the top.
If you had 4 shop owners in Solvang, all of whom wanted to use green, and they just happened to be friends, they all talked about it, and they, one after another came and applied for green, so you had one whole street that would be nothing but pea green. Can the design review committee say no to that, if that green is on the palette?
And then that's something that Chair Williams mentioned, is could we craft something that says every other, building can't be this hue? That we most certainly can.
Yeah, I can't get it.
Quality of color, yeah, that's a good one. And the quality of color is that's a great one, and that's trying to get property owners to work with us on that. And visual examples, what acceptable, allowable, absolutely. I'm very much a visual person. And then Colors and roof pitches, yep.
I think examples are really good too. I think that everybody likes a nice picture to guide you in how that works. And there's some really excellent examples of buildings that kind of go beyond. They don't just have the body color and the half timbers, then they have the detail around the color between the timber, and it'd be lovely to put some of those in. Yeah.
Yeah, and again, the point of the design handbook is so that, I know sometimes you say we're speaking a foreign language, but that's really the point of the handbook, is that not only can it help the design professional, but also our property owners who aren't in the minutia, who aren't in the weeds, to be able to pick it up and we'll easily be able to translate those graphically. And again, that's something that we want to do at a city staff level. So we don't want to farm it out. We don't want to get a consultant for it. It's something that most certainly myself and Lisa, I just voluntold her to do it, so.
Voluntold.
You make a really good point that the plainer the language and the more complete the sentences and the better grammar is extremely important in all of these things. And because sometimes people read things that are shortened or are not correct in some way or whatever, it does sound like a foreign language and they don't understand it.
Right, and we were looking to do something similar with our sign ordinance once we kind of get direction of where to go. I've worked in other jurisdictions where we've done a handbook and we've done a pamphlet, and we just brought down to the nitty gritty what is actually allowed, what's not allowed, and leave the legalese in the code, but at least give the pertinent chunks, the sound bites is what I like to call them. Are there any more comments about where we want to head with the design handbook before I move on?
I would comment that the visual aspect is really important, like Esther said, because most people are visual and they don't necessarily have that expertise to put things together. And if the more we give them to look at and see, then they get it much quicker. And the whole process could be moved forward in a more efficient way, because that's what we want to do, keep things moving forward.
Yeah, our goal is to make this as streamlined as we can
Right.
with getting the results, because ultimately, everybody that's here in town is here trying to do business because they find this an environment that's conducive to business. And they are if they are property owners, their real estate is very valuable. Let's keep it that way by maintaining what's so unique about our community. And that's, I think, why we're all sitting here today.
Agreed.
And that's why those of us that serve on these committees are here.
We're focused on the village design district, but, there's two districts bumping up against each other at the Veterans Memorial Hall. And we're trying to define colors and other objective standards on the village side. We shouldn't do any design handbook in isolation. We've got to make sure that the village is distinct from the mission design district.
And it is already. So in the objective standards, there's a very distinct thing of the two. And again, the design handbook is to cover both villages, the DD1 and DD2. But we're just, again, trying to get a direction of what we want to see inside of it. It's pretty clear we want to be visual. We want it to boil down the language that it's easy to read. And again, the whole idea and genesis is to have a collaborative work effort with the DRC over the next few months as we pump out things each meeting and go over sections. Do we like this graphic? Do we not like this graphic? Is this wording correct? Is this not wording correct? So,
And Dennis, to your point, the reason that DD1 is getting the attention is because that's the one that's been here forever, and we've got a design, guideline of DD1. We don't have anything. That's a brand new DD2 came out of let's just do a DD2 on that general plan. So we're behind on that one, and people are not emotional about it yet. I'm sure they will be, but that here, it's
People don't come to Solvang to see.
DD2.
They come to see the mission. Right. They don't come to see the architecture, the colors, the roofs, the pitches of what we're not calling the mission design. Right.
And for those who may be in the virtual world or in the room. So with the general plan, there's not just the Danish design district, the
Called DD1.
DD1, there's also DD2, which is the mission design district, which, as was just mentioned, starts with the Vets Hall and the complex there, and obviously the mission, and goes down towards Almo Pantado. And that's a whole different set of guidelines and standards. And it has very few projects at this time that are impacted, whereas there's more happening in DD1, I think, that is impacted by these. Or at least there's more passion and voice because there's more color in projects.
Any other comments from commission members or committee members? Anybody want to come and talk versus me? All right. We will wraps up the design portion of our programming.
Before we wrap up the design, just one question for you, Raphael. I think that it's really important that once there is kind of the takeaway, I think that staff is going to begin developing these guidelines for the handbook. I'm requesting that we start with the paint color. I'd also like to see that there's more opportunity for community input once there's the bones of this handbook put together, and that we have an opportunity for a workshop at that point again, not just amongst the DRC and planning, but really get the community in when there's something to look at.
That's an excellent idea, and again, it's trying to vet this so it works for everybody. So I'm definitely all for that. I think Randy is too.
And Esther, I mean, also a good starting point is what staff did do. I mean, I
Yes.
took issues with a lot of their stuff, but a lot of it's really, really good. You know, if
And we
they
have
had an
something.
eave, but maybe it shouldn't be 12 inches, it's 8 inches in downtown. I don't know, the details need to be, but it's a really good framework. That's where you start. And then
Right.
you guys can pick it apart, or anybody from the public can.
And we have lots to add to it and build on, which we all know. Yeah.
Right. And the hardest part has been, at least looking back, and again, I'm an outsider coming in, is looking back at the old minutes of DRC, Planning Commission, City Council, and the stops and starts of trying to get something, and then it just became almost too hard, and then city staff just, give it up. I don't like to give up, so.
Well, and I think what we really have going for us is that we have a general plan which has a lot of guidelines that kind of set, the path forward with a lot of this.
Yeah, as with transparency and what have you, would it make sense, once we have the outline, if you will, of this handbook, that we try to involve local architects and developers, designers, get their reaction? Because the whole point of this is, I think, to make their life easier while maintaining our standards for the city.
Yeah, we
And
can-
what we've talked about here is mostly on the city side. It might be useful to get input from, the developers and architects and designers that have to work with the city.
We'd really like to see them at the table in the conversation, because what we all know is that we have these lengthy discussions and we have things that come before us, and there's no community input, and then the project is executed, and then we hear from the community, and it's too late. So we really, really want to encourage the community to come here and be part of the conversation. Give us your input so that we can do our best to represent the community and move forward.
All right.
You made such a good point. You need the community in early to make these big changes. It's been 30-some years since there have been these changes in the code and on zoning and objective standards and all. And the community really didn't have a whole lot of warning about this workshop today. It seemed like it was just happening as an afterthought, and it was not the city agenda. I mean, until last week, it was not on DRC or
Actually, it's been in the works for a while.
It may have been in the works, but we didn't do
Yeah.
anything about it. We looked and looked and looked. We talked to the council. and it was like, nobody knew until it was scheduled for the 26th of February.
Until the agenda comes out.
Today,
Yeah.
I think the city just has to do better on getting the word out early and inviting people to come. Otherwise, you know, some of us may be viewed as a bit obstructionist, but I think a lot of people in the city, you know, have a lot of good things to help you guys with, you know, in multiple points of view. We're lay people. If the zoning and DRC design review code is understandable by us, it'll be understandable by the developer.
This is also where surveys could come in handy. You know, for instance, like the Solvang sign ordinance survey, that was something that each business owner had a chance to take a look at. It'd be pretty simple to send an email or a letter to residents and business owners soliciting input.
And I think too, ultimately, there's really not, it's not being looked at as being a huge change, but rather just putting it, it's the detail that isn't present. There's too much nuance in the guidelines where it needs to be solidified to be more black and white. Ha.
That's it. I mean, great example is our R3 zone. I'm going to ask you, just, do you know how to measure a front setback the way our old code used to? Do you have any knowledge of that?
How to measure
A front setback, yeah.
Well, I guess if it's 10 feet, I get out a ruler and measure it, I'm not sure where.
Yeah.
From the center of the street to the wall, or from the sidewalk to the wall, I don't know.
So our code was exactly like that, actually. It said in certain places, it could be the center of the street, but didn't actually say the center line of the street, because that's the technical term. Or in some instances, if there was a sidewalk present, it could be from the back of property line, or if none of it's present, at the judgment of the planning manager. So one,
Anything you can do
just,
to detail
just,
that,
I'm giving you an example. So the new code now says 15 feet for the back property line. Not hard. It literally says where we measure property line,
Right.
15 feet. So, and that's been the nuance of our code for the longest time. So,
it was vague.
yeah, that's an understatement.
Yeah.
But those essentially were majority of our changes, was that. And it just so happened to be, yeah, it's a large document, I'll give you that. But a lot of it was reorganized, a lot of it was updated, and a lot of it was basically doing what the state had told us to do. So, all right, moving on.
Raphael, before you move on. Where's the best place a citizen can go to look at what was approved in December?
So it's on our E-Code 360 where the municipal code is under new laws. And it's sitting right there. And it's a little tricky because they rechanged the way the formatting of their website is, but our entire municipal code sits on our website. And it's a E-Code 360 doc, and then you search Solvang, the entire municipal code is there, and it's under new code. And they used to have a little triangle that told you that the code had changed, but that's gone, so.
That's a good
Must have
point.
been the website.
You know, the public generally goes to Solvang, municipal code, zoning, and what they get is a draft, as you said. It's not the final, it's not, and it was full of errors and all sorts of organizational problems, but, you know, why is that still up there? I have to ask.
And
Why is the city leaving it up there for 100 days?
And I'll put it to you, we're only two people.
I know, you're with us.
So,
You know, it's a mistake, and
you know.
the public gets all bamboozled because they try to get involved, and then all this stuff is not available.
But
And it
again,
doesn't make any sense.
her door is open, my door is open.
I know.
I'm available 8 to 5. You can email me. I'm always available. I'm always
I
available.
appreciate that. It shouldn't have to be that way.
But it is.
Well, it shouldn't have.
It should be that way. I'm a public servant. I need to be available.
Not to call your office and say, could you give me just,
we're-
could you give me directions about how to?
We're here to help. So, I mean,
Well, and that's the goal of this workshop in some ways. Not all of that, but at least some of it.
all right. Can I move on now? All right.
Oh, the council is listening.
All right. So, so now we're going to go to the sign portion of our workshop. So we're going to go through sort of 3 issues of signs. And mainly, these are bigger picture issues, not necessarily the nuances of the nitty-gritty. But these were 3 issues that were really popped out based on the sign survey that's in your staff report that was done in the summer of 2024. And again, it's the same staff report that was given to the City Council in November. So respondents did request additional temporary signage. And so that temporary signage comes in all types and flavors and forms. But specifically, 2 types of temporary signages were asked for. A-frame signs or sandwich board signs was the first one. So again, business owners were looking for ways to generate more foot traffic, more direction to their businesses, how to make themselves stand out. So currently, A-frame signs are prohibited throughout the city, period. We're not supposed to have them. But there are some people that put them up. And so things to remember that we have to live by is this idea that a sign regulation has to be time, place, manner. So regulation in terms of placement, in terms of where it could be located, regulations of manner. So think of not necessarily look. I said look there, but it's more of does it have to be above a doorway? Does it can it only project out 8 inches or 12 feet? Does it have to be 8 feet above the door? Yeah, 8 feet above the sidewalk. And then time. Time's the other one. So time could be, if it's a temporary banner, 20 days. If it's an A-frame sign, it's got to be out during business hours and got to come back inside during business hours. So time, place, manner. That is what we look for. And again, in the survey itself, that there were business owners that wanted this option. And so that's why we asked the council, and we're having a workshop. And so I will put back the QR code for those that have just joined us to play along.
Can we talk about A-frame signs or no?
But there'll be a chance. Anyways, so we're going to ask a couple questions in regards to A-frame signs. And again, if you want to join in, there's the QR code. We'll flip over.
That's the QR code.
And we've lost the
Bring it
QR
back.
code. I know.
Bring it back.
We'll bring it back.
Is it the same QR code as
Yeah,
before?
I lost
It is.
though.
It very much is. And so, and again, if you don't have the QR code, you can go to menti.com, use code 4208 6809. So, words or phrases for thoughts on A-frame signs in the village. So, let's see what we got. Yeah.
That's the first thing I've read. Great font size.
So again, just looking for word or phrases or thoughts. And I believe it's bans in the public right of way. They couldn't, the A, never allowed within reason.
Fonts get small.
Hard to police, yeah. It kind of is a little, we'll get into the policing of the design in a minute, so. Variety of answers so far. So, on your screen is some words so far, and then you see the image of an A-frame sign. Time, place, manner. So again, currently our existing code bans it straight up, but there are some options if we want to go there. So we got a couple more responses before I go to the next one.
Raphael, before you
Yeah.
move on, can you give us a little background on why they were prohibited?
That was before my time. Anybody want to chime in before?
For those words right there. That's why people say we don't want them. We banned off-premise signs, and we didn't want them, and they become off-premise signs unless they're right in front of your door and da-da-da-da-da. I use the example of on Highway 1 down going to LA Airport, and there's huge billboard signs, right, and neon. And so I put one up, and you go one bigger, and you go one bigger, and it's just visual pollution. If everybody had three, if everyone had one A-frame sign in Solvang, you wouldn't see them. It defeats the purpose. Now, if I'm the only one with an A-frame sign, I win. But that isn't how it works. So it just becomes visual pollution and clutter in many people's minds. Obviously, that's how I feel because of that. And there are some folks that obviously feel differently. And many times the people that feel differently are tucked into a courtyard or they're down a side street and I'm not being critical, they're not paying the bigger dollars to be on the main street. They're paying less rent off-street, but they want to put those signs to bring their people down to their shops, taking and advertising. So there's been talk of, if you're not on the main street, then you can have them. Well, wait a minute. Why is that? You can steal my customers when you're competing against me, but I can't have them? Well, you're in a good spot. Why pay 10 times what you pay or 3 times what you pay? I mean, there's that. It becomes very heated when it does come up with off-premise signs or even A-frame signs. Temporary signs is a whole different matter of a grand opening or sale or whatever. Everybody can do that because you got the time, you know. But the A-frames, it became heated, so it's always been banned. Is what it came down to.
Well, and they were a trip hazard because of location, especially in public walkways. We all know that the sidewalks, you know, at times are just jammed with people. And even in private courtyards or public or private property spaces, the same thing, but definitely on the public right-of-ways.
So we have a couple.
Thank you for the explanations, and I think other than the trip hazard, the same could be said for almost any sign that goes up, especially temporary signs. Pretty soon, everything disappears if we're doing that, so signage really is important, so thank you for that background.
So we have a comment here. No.
I'm Tracy, I'm from the Solvang Chamber of Commerce. I'm just going to say, having traveled to Hillsburg, having traveled to Winters, having traveled to Europe, A-frame signs are acceptable. If we want to be European, they are. There's a way to do it. And when you have a courtyard and you're tucked way back over here, as many of my businesses are, and they're doing, you know, hard work, and people don't know they're down there. People don't know I have restaurants down in that area. We don't know we have restaurants in a courtyard because they just can't see it. And it's 2 inches by 8 inches is the way. And I'll talk about wayfare signs later, but I'm just saying this is something, if we want to be Europe, this is something we need to consider and look back. These rules were created in 1986 and 1988, and yes, they've been updated, but I would like them truly to be looked at for all of our businesses. Thank you.
Would you, can you relate an A-frame sign to what I heard was 2 inches by 8 inches? I didn't follow.
Meant wayfinder signs.
Directional signs in every one of our courtyards are 2 inches by typically 8 inches in the courtyards. I'm in a courtyard, there's a sign, and unless you get right up to it, you could never tell what it was in our courtyard. You wouldn't know driving by
Tracy,
how to
the
find it.
code allows 1 square foot for those, I'm just telling you, in a courtyard, in any complex.
You're objecting or recommending?
Recommending.
So, thank you, Tracy, by the way. Anybody else want to speak on A-frames? No? No? Okay. So, as mentioned, there's a couple ways to do it.
Can I just bring up one last thing? And it has to do with the survey. Because where I took issue with the survey is that we had 53 responses, I believe. And we brought up A-frame signs because of those, I think, a third, 30%, 29%, said we had to have A-frame signs. Well, a third of 50 is 15 or 16 businesses. There's 170 to 200 businesses in Solvang. The survey, whoever made the effort and did it, I applaud you. It needs to be redone. It could come out that we have 70 people want A-frame signs or 120, and then we better listen. But when 15 responses are A-frame signs, and we're going to spend time talking about it, to me, the survey is not relevant to our discussion. And we shouldn't hang our hat on that the survey came out that 30% of, literally 15 businesses out of 170 plus, there's people that own properties that don't have businesses. And there are businesses that did not get the survey and didn't have a chance to respond. Back to somebody's point of bringing people in and getting them, and maybe talking to also open to the public, not just people that have businesses in town, because it affects locals likewise. They might want the A-frame signs. They might think that's great. They may hate the visual clutter. So we need to do some more work on that.
Well, that's part of the reason why we're here. And like,
We're hanging our hat on the survey.
well, I mean,
And I just did that with it, you know?
Yeah.
I mean, great effort back last summer, but, you know, we just didn't have that many responses. And I know it's hard to get people to do these responses, but we need to do a better job.
I didn't see the survey. I don't know how you see them. I saw a Facebook link to this 2 days ago. I would have made a comment too.
yeah, we handed them out to businesses, and, you know, we got links, the chamber helped out, so we try to get the word out. And again, but that's why we're here. So now that we have thoughts on the A-frame sign, so that the question is, do we want them? And so, you know, so this is the next poll question, is do we want them? No frames at all, which is the current existing ban. Yes, allow A-frame signs, but again, under the time, place, manner. There is a way to actually design these. There is a way to police them, as long as the rules are laid out for them to happen. The other one is private property.
Yours come up?
As mentioned earlier, you know, do we want these on private properties? Yeah, absolutely. We don't want to see them in our sidewalk. It's hard. If you've been here during Danish Days and Yule Fest, it's hard enough to do, you know, A-frame signs on the sidewalk, let alone it's hard enough to even pass through the sidewalk, let alone put an A-frame sign on. But this private property issue is a whole different ballgame. It's a whole different story. Is if it's off of our right-of-way, do we want to allow it? One or two, give me, again, time, place, manner regulations. So, anybody want to comment about that?
I just think you ought to add one more thing to that. It's not just time placement, but add enforcement. It's nearly impossible to enforce these things.
Agreed.
Yeah, enforcement is hard. However, again, as some other jurisdictions have done on the A-frame signs, is they've done programs, and where the city staff has approved the A-frame sign, they put something on it, so we know that you track it, and it's, you know, the cost was nothing. That's the other thing too, is while enforcement, I agree, needs to be done, if we greenlight that, how does that program look like? How does it look like if you do A-frame registration? Is there a cost to it? Do we want to, you know, so there are many flavors, but again, this is just trying to open up the conversation to see what we want to do about this and how we move forward. And ultimately, we have to bring something back to the council to say, how do you want us to move forward?
Raphael? There's 2 or 3 aspects. We're making, if you're talking about an A-frame sign, what you're looking at is a chalkboard. Are A-frame signs chalkboards or permanent signs?
This is an A-frame sign.
I know.
It just has a chalkboard background.
Yeah, well, that-
No.
Not now.
and that's my point. I mean, you can't just say A-frame without putting some other requirements on it. And I think Tracy's comment about the way signs for those back in courtyards would eliminate the need for some of these if they were large enough to support the businesses inside the court.
Yeah, so, and that's a great comment. Again, when we talk about signs, it's the same thing, time, place, manner. Manner is basically how you want it to look. So if you want it to be a A-frame sign to be wood, you want it to have metal, but you don't want plastic, that you can regulate that you can very much regulate that. Wayfinding signs is a whole different, our code talks about wayfinding, but in a more of a vehicular aspect and not necessarily an aspect of pedestrian level orientation, which it's severely lacking. And I 100%, I saw, Tracy, saw your email, I 100% agree with you. We need wayfinding signs and signage types for those type, and again, time, place, manner. If you have a certain amount, building with a certain X amount of tenants, could you be allowed an additional wayfinding sign? And if so, how does that look? So that's a whole different subset, and most certainly, we at city staff would be open to providing, again, a tool that a tenant or property owner can have to help their businesses out.
Well, and the wayfinding, an example is the Copenhagen Square that has many signs, and the applicants, the tenants change, applicants come in for signs, and we've asked staff to work with the owner to come up with a directory and kind of wayfinding sign for the things that are kind of inside the building, because it's become such a visual clutter over there, and right now there's not any way to limit that. But that's off topic of A-frames. It looks like the consensus is for A-frames on private property, or which I support as well, with guidelines as to the look and the time. So they go out when your business opens, they come in when your business closes, and I would suggest that they have a wood look. And that, again, that they be, and I don't know how to put this objectively, still has to be room to walk through the pathway to the business without falling around the A-frame signs, so.
Well, yeah, they'd have to meet code of 48 inches, whatever it is, that you have to have anyway. And then chalkboard, not whiteboards.
Yes.
Black or chalkboards, not green or green and black. I mean,
Yeah.
I don't know, but, whatever
Yeah,
we
but
come
it has
up
to be
with.
specified.
Yeah, it needs to be specified, absolutely, and size, obviously.
And I think that when it's specified, it needs to be something that's readily available. And we found this out from restaurant menu signs, and the code has a specific size with a limitation, but all the type that you can commercially buy are like a half an inch bigger. An inch, okay, a half on each side or something. So we want to look at what's kind of we want to make it as functional as we can for the people who are going to use it.
You also need to take into consideration that if it is a windy day, you need to somehow secure that sign in some manner. So you need to take that into consideration.
But do you want sandbags sitting on crossbars all the time?
You
If
gotta
they're gonna
figure that
blow
out.
over? Yeah.
Also, do you want to consider signs that are stuck into a planter in the same way you consider A-frame signs?
So, and that's an interesting point, because it's in our code, but as I mentioned at the beginning, it's not stuck in stone. So so if that's something that, again, it's a give and take. Personally, I've never worked in a jurisdiction or even wrote codes as a consultant for a jurisdiction where signs were allowed in a planter. I found it was kind of odd that we had that, but cool, good for us. We're good. But with that being said, I mean, if that's something that we want to change, we most certainly can. However, we would have to amortize signs, and there's an amortization schedule, which basically means we would have to give a property owner or tenant a certain amount of time to basically exit out the sign. And that takes time. It's not an overnight, it's not 15 days, it's not 30 days, it's not 50 days. It's a while.
Rafi, isn't those that are in planters, I thought they're just pole signs and ground signs must be in a planter. They need to be in the ground, and then you had to have a planter around them. I don't think there's any little temporary real estate signs that are allowed.
There are a couple of them that are literally planted in a pot planter.
Yeah.
They're bolted to the ground.
Yeah,
I
that's,
thought they had to be wayfinding signs, not for a specific business. Yeah.
Just take a walk down some of our.
I've seen them, but I thought that was the case.
And again, a lot of these, and to your point, Esther, we've now been here for almost a year and a half now, of your and the DRCs to not allow exceptions, or if there's an exception, you got to give a good reason and rationale, and we're trying to do that now. When people ask for an exception, it's not just, well, I want an exception. Okay, give me the reason. Make the findings. Give me a
Make it
reason.
compelling.
Give me a reason why they can make the findings, and tying it back to our code. A lot of those were exceptions, which is why you see them there. So it's something to keep in mind. And again, is Standards. Do we want to make it a standard? And it all comes back to that. And when you make it a standard, then it becomes, this is the bar you got to meet. If you can't meet that bar, you got to give me a super compelling reason why you cannot meet that bar. And just because it's cheaper should not be a reason.
Which is often a driving factor.
Yes.
Would you give an example of what you meant by private property, and where would I see an A-frame sign?
Oh, well,
Private
like,
property?
So private property is not, so city, right-of-way is essentially what we're talking right-of-way. So we're talking the street and the sidewalk. That's considered right-of-way. So that's considered city property. So we wouldn't want an A-frame sign on our sidewalk because, one, it creates an ADA hazard for Americans with Disabilities Act. Two, it creates a, yeah.
I'm agreeing with you, I'm just trying to get an example.
So,
like
Examples,
Park Place.
Park Place,
Yeah.
or Denmark Square, Mortensen's Bakery, every building that I own has all this private space, and I'm the one that said never have A-frame signs. But if we're gonna pass them, then I guess I'll have them in all my courtyards, which I disagree with. But that's,
the U.S. property owner can limit it.
and then the property owner can limit, and the property owner can also, he's gonna have or she's gonna have the liability if a sign goes over on somebody, so then they're gonna force it against their, because they've got insurance, and they're gonna force it against their tenant. And they're gonna take that risk, or a landlord's gonna say no A-frame signs to any of your tenants. But there's lots of malls. Jensen's Courtyard, there's lots and
All
lots.
over.
Go into the mall to see the A-frame sign.
Right.
Correct.
Yeah.
So then
Or you can
why
see them
is
from
there
the
an
street.
A-frame?
If I put one between Mortensen's and Peasant's Feast, you'd sure see it, and it's on private property.
And
Or in
again,
front of, you know.
it's time, place, manner. And again, time, place, manner. And it was drilled in my head by my former boss, which is why I say it so fast. Time, place, manner. So time, or place is a great example. If you don't want an A-frame sign approximately 5 feet from the edge of right-of-way, you can write it in like that. So again, time, place, manner,
My
more comments on
concern
A-frames.
with A-frame signs is what Jennifer brought up, the stability of signs. We kind of count on our afternoon breezes around here, especially in the summer. I call it my Pacific AC when you get that nice breeze, so it's not as hot. That blows over signs. So it's always going to be, and then like I said, do you want a sandbag on it? What are you going to have for a weight? So this is why all these ordinances and these decisions become so, what seems like it should be so easy to decide becomes so complex to be able to actually put it into a code and not have it be kind of willy-nilly and such different aesthetics and placements that aren't logical or impeding movement and walkways, even on private property. Because I have been in private properties where it impeded the flow. I see somebody in the audience.
I would just say on private property, the private property owner has the liability there, and I think they're probably smart enough to figure out how to anchor it. You can put some stipulations on things that you don't want to see, I suppose, or things that are acceptable, but they'll always have to maintain ADA access. And so it strikes me, if you are not doing public property, I think that problem will be solved by those who actually want them and want to put them there. I don't know that you'll see a ton of them.
And umbrellas are the same way. They
Right.
blow over
Yeah.
all the time and hit
Yeah.
people, and then you get sued.
Yeah.
I don't mind so much the A-frame. Being in real estate, we have those signs, so we're always having to level them down or keep them down with whatever we have. So it's just a stipulation, I think, that needs to be in that handbook.
If they're going to be permitted.
Correct.
You had a question?
Yeah, I just wanted to say that, Kim Jensen, King of Horse Chocolate. It comes down, it's pretty simple. The city has liability issues with everything else that we do here in this town. And it comes to simplicity. You don't want it to blow over and hurt somebody or an ADA issue, so the city's not gonna do something. It goes back to the private property owners. They can have the choice to have it.
Yes.
They can choose. Of course, they have to follow the rules that if they're gonna have it up, it has to follow the modifications or whatever's being done. Liability's on them, so it's on their head. So if the city take care of themselves, private properties take care of themselves, it's a pretty simple issue. You just have to set the modification.
Right. Yep.
Rafi, you made a point about you probably need some little bit of distance between public and where you put them. Or do you just, can you go right to the property line? I don't know, it's open for discussion for me.
And again, the point is get feedback, take to the council, and say, city staff, go work on it, and then we come back and more public forums and vet it. Because it's not just the distance from the public right of way, it's how many. And so that's the other key too. Because again, the point is we don't want, while we want to provide a tool for business, we don't want a proliferation of A-frame signs all lining up on the entry of courtyards. Then just not our look. Don't look great, so.
And it impedes the flow of traffic on top of that, so, yeah. So is there have we reached a consensus? Is it enough to have you report to city council?
The report back, I believe, is that based on the feedback that we've gotten from the workshop and you folks, is to allow for A-frame signs, provide, go craft regulations that allow for A-frame signs on private property only, maintain no A-frame signs on public right-of-way. That's an easy one, which is good. And then discussing essentially how we're going to do enforcement of them and set up a program. So that's essentially what we'd report back.
And one other thing that was brought up, you talked about distance from the property line, number on property, probably should not be more than one per business.
Absolutely, absolutely.
And instead of specifying from the property line, specify the maximum distance from the entrance to the business.
There's a couple ways to slice it, and that's typically when you write in sign codes and allow for A-frame signs, that's usually, it's got to be X amount of feet from the doorway, it's got to provide for ADA accessibility, businesses that are fronting on the public street, there are ways to craft it, but we just need to go start. So, all right.
I think that you've got the gist of what it seems like most of us are wishing for here.
Well, not me, I still say no.
Yeah. Well, that's countered by she says yes, so.
Tracy?
I actually think when you have these codes, the ordinances, every business owner needs to sign on it. If you're gonna have something new, make them sign that they know. Some of these ordinances are so old and businesses come in, they're sold, and people don't know the ordinances. We're giving them out, it's a long page of regulations. You know that and I know that. You've shortened it down over the last few years, but make everyone sign for it. I'm just saying, when they get their business license, it's very simple. I heard that you can't run the paper because it's too much paper to give everyone the full sign packet.
No.
I'm just saying, make them sign for it, then they know they have signed for it, and they know the rules, and that they have it, and they've received it in hand. I just tried to find it right now and can't on your site.
Give them a flash drive with it on there as part of their business
Well,
license.
I think what Tracy's saying is they're signing that they've received this information and it is their responsibility to abide by that. We would like to think that would happen.
And typically when a new business does want to open up, we give them a lot of information, almost overwhelming at times, simply just the amount of stuff.
Yeah, and I think that is part of the issue is that, but that said, there still needs to eventually, we're talking more sign stuff, but there needs to be some kind of resource that's readily available and easy to find. And the chamber can help you share that.
We
when
talked
that's
about this
together.
one time about enforcement too, and I can't remember, maybe our city attorney said you can't really do it, but a lot of times we have tenants that violate sign ordinances, that's what we're talking about. They get a warning and notice, and then 7 days later, if it's not down, they'll get a second one, and then they're gonna get a fine. Eventually, they'll get a fine. And you can make the fine $1 million, they're not gonna pay it. You can make it $10, they'll just pay it and keep violating it. They also just won't pay. And then maybe they close up and they go away, and they might have $1,000 worth of fines. And there's no remedy for it unless you go to the landlord and you say, hey, landlord, enforce this stuff against your tenant because you're supposed to be responsible, and we're going to slap it as a lien against your property. And so I'm going to make sure that my tenants follow it because I'm the one that's going to get the warning and I'm going to get the fine eventually, and I'll take it out of the security deposit or however I write up the lease. And I don't know, that to me seems like the way to enforce these violations. I don't care if it's a hanging sign or a temporary sign or a banner sign or an A-frame, whatever it is. A lot of times the tenants will ignore and the landlord doesn't care. Well, you'll get his or her attention, that's for sure. If there's a way to go against them, and I don't know if we can do that or not.
Well, I think at this point, aren't landlords being notified at the same time the business, or the property owners being notified along with the business owner when there's
We've
violations?
been doing that now, yes.
We're not getting a fine.
That's true.
Well, I mean, the tools that we have for code enforcement, I'll step up to the mic and listen.
The tools that we have for code enforcement are innumerable. It's a continuum of force, if you will. We try to get voluntary compliance. We hope that people will follow the rules. If they don't, then we can do fines. If that doesn't work and they're not paying the fines, then we look for other alternatives. Ultimately, as the city attorney and city prosecutor, I literally have the power to put someone in jail for a violation of our municipal code, because the municipal code can be a misdemeanor. Have I ever done that? No. Would I ever do that? Not in even the most extreme case would I ever consider that. But that is a power that we have. We also have the power to go to the civil courts and seek an injunction. And then the courts take it up. So we have this whole array, but we try to resolve it at the lowest possible level that we can. And it is tough because I'll be honest with you, it's a loss leader. We're not in it for the money. We're in it to make the code enforceable. And so it becomes a budgetary question of whether or not the city wants to spend however many dollars it is to enforce the code, knowing that you're only going to get a $100 fine. So that's the things that I have to look at when I get one of these cases coming across my desk.
In the case of an A-frame sign, I'm the type, it's like, okay, verbal warning, fine, escalate, thank you for your sign, it's gone.
Yeah.
So I don't know if that's legal or not.
Well, you can take, you
public right
absolutely
away,
can.
yeah.
But we
In the
can't
public,
fine
yeah.
a landlord. There's no way to, we don't have that power. I mean, we certainly have got fines. I just, to one tenant or that, can it jump that or can you fine, can you go straight to the landlord?
So if it's a violation of the zoning code, then it's a violation of the use of property, and it can be assessed against the landowner in that case. So there is a way that you can do it. It's a question of, if you know who the landlord is, if they're out of the area, are they going to have that kind of interest? If you can't get their attention on something like that, then what's the next step? Because the person that you're really trying to deal with is not the landlord typically. And if you have good landlords and they have a good relationship with their tenant, then they'll talk with them, say, hey, cut it out. If you have a bad relationship between the tenant and the landlord is absentee or doesn't live in the community and doesn't really want anything other than the monthly check for the rent, they're not going to spend any time putting pressure on the tenant in that situation. So then we have to start looking at ways, okay, is there a way that we can put it against the property itself? And that's when we get into injunctions, and that's when we get into having to take it to court. Don't typically do that, but that is a tool that we have.
And what a lot of use of time and money also for those kind of violations.
So why have regulations?
Do you think you could make a lien on the property like the IRS does? I mean, they don't even have to go to court.
Take it.
Report a lien in the courthouse.
Yeah, added
Serious
property
fines
taxes.
that are not paid if the city code says these are jointly the landlord and the tenant's responsibility, and there shall be a lien against the property. Can you do that?
We're not the IRS, we don't have that power. We have a
You
specific,
can't legislate that in the
we have a specific set of powers that are delegated both by the state legislature and inherent to our status as a charter city. But it is an incredibly complicated process to do that because we don't collect as the county does, and the county has its own requirements for what it needs to see before we put anything on the property tax roll. So the short answer is yes, we have the power to do it. The fact that it is so complicated means that it's rarely enforced that way.
I'm thinking that Tracy had a great idea with regard to an acknowledgement of the rules and regulations. And in that, they can also be held liable for any violation. Or you can also have in that same document potential forfeiture of the sign itself. So if you had the ability to take it down and have their attention immediately. And you just have to have the resolve to do so.
How about if you lose your business license?
Yeah.
I think we're back into court. I'm taking business license away. It becomes very, very, shutting a business down is really,
And I think that the last thing we want to do is be impeding businesses. Most of all, we just really want them to comply and everybody be successful.
How about a set of different levels? One is the fine is, or obviously, or even worse, or how about city water? Shut off their water. You can't run and function a restaurant, you can't operate your business, then you're not in the code, so. I'm
So-
just
So you
telling
better pay your 100.
I'm not saying you have to do that, but I'm just saying there could be levels.
So,
You can
Right.
go and do something. If you can, with the city, if they don't want to put someone in jail, great, don't put them in jail.
I think the state banned that. Yeah, I don't think the state allows
well,
it.
these are ideas that Nexus and the Constitution sometimes has other things, but, you know, with that being said, bringing it back to A-frame signs, is
Yeah.
that we got what we needed? Any other comments on A-frame signs? 'Cause-
Raphael, I was just going to jump in and say, a lot of these ideas are good, or at least worth exploring. However, our code as it's currently written doesn't allow even some of the most rudimentary enforcement other than giving a citation if they refuse to pay. The language is such that, you know, it's just a cumbersome process the way it's written. And that's one of the reasons why this whole code update is necessary.
All right.
It sure seems like you collect the fine when they come in every year to get their business license renewed. You just add it to the fee.
All right.
Well, I know you dismissed that, but it's something that, you know, could be
Well,
put in the code.
if only it were that simple.
So we're gonna move on to temporary signs, and then second to last one, so that way we can get to wrapping up. Yep, for sure. All right.
Bye, Steve.
All right, so second to last topic is temporary signs. So again, we have existing temporary sign regulations that are inconsistent with the time, place, manner. Regulations required by Reed versus Town of Gilbert. It's the case I constantly cite. Again, so here, this is an example of temp banners. May include placement prior to permanent signage, advertising for special events. Other temporary signage envisioned by business owners. We actually have a civic events, or we have a civic event sign that we have a fee for, but no process. That, you know, tells you enough of what's going on. Let's see if I can. Oh, there we go. So again, these are examples of temp signs. So we have the one banner sign in the middle. It's expressly prohibited in our code. Same with the feather flag sign that's on your right-hand side, also expressly prohibited. But we do have some property owners, you know, some business owners from time to time who are informed of the sign regulations, who we tell them over the phone about the sign regulations. We plead their case, especially at building permit process. Hey, have you thought about signs? You should get your signs. But they just, usually for some reason, and it makes sense because if you're taking on, especially if you're a business, you're taking on, you're opening up and you're worried about everything else. The last thing that's on your mind is signs. So the minute you open up, you're trying to get people through the door. And it may sound counterintuitive to a lot of folks, but it's not. It's really not, because you know you're trying to make a vision come true, and you're trying to get a space open, or you're trying to go through a construction project. That is the last thing on your mind. As much as you don't want it to be, such as branding and other exercises, it usually ends up being the last thing on someone's mind. So again, and then the last one is sort of that coming soon, you know, banner sign. So we do have some regulations, but again, I know we talked about the survey and respondents, but there was an inquiry about adding the additional temporary signage, because some of it is really cumbersome in terms of our temp signs. What we are trying to do from a city staff perspective is when someone comes in with a sign permit and they ask for a temp sign, we actually try to roll it in into one versus, and again, trying to make sure they come under our code, but our code gets into a little bit of content in terms of what it actually needs to read. And unfortunately, I can't get into content anymore, which is why we're coming to you guys to talk about temp signs. So second to last question here so now that I've given you the spiel about temp signs, as we move on. So again, word of phases for thoughts on temporary signs. If you've exit out of your screen, it's menti, menti.com. Use code is 4208-6809. So just give us a word or phrase for your thoughts on temporary signs.
And are we still concentrating on the village area, or does this apply to the entire city?
Good question.
It's actually segregated. Our sign ordinance is segregated into two, believe it or not. So if you're outside the village, it's one set of regulations. If you're inside the village, it's another. So that's part of this problem with our temp signs. And so again, we're trying to get an idea of where we want to go with this, and then sort of begin looking at it at the whole city as well. So. You have a size limit, time limit, so limits, very temporary. And again, that's the whole time, place, manner. If you're doing a temp sign, it's not 100 days, it's not 360 days. Most communities, when they do temp banners, there's a size limit, and usually it's like 20 days up, 40 days down, or whatever. So again, time, place, manner.
Do we have any codes in place on that now? Because I see a lot of signs that stay a long time.
Go ahead, Lisa. Yeah.
Well, I just wanted to add for the temporary banners that we've done, it's been more of a courtesy because the sign processing for new businesses can take a while. And because banners are technically prohibited in our code without approval by the city manager or designee, it's something for new businesses we've only done and we approve over the counter if they submit their permanent sign application as well. So with that, it's not really in our code, it's more of a courtesy. And they should be taking it down once the permanent signage is approved. And again, only for new businesses, not,
Right.
Right, and the current code is content-based, unfortunately, because it has to say the word grand opening or opening soon. So that's the other sort of nuance to our code, is it's got the content regulation on there. So again, it comes back to the issue of time, place, manner.
I mean, temporary signs make sense. We've allowed them. Especially on a grand opening, you just have to have the day, 30 days before you open and 30 days after you open, or 15 and 15, whatever it is. I think that you guys have done a pretty good job on it. I know it's walking a minefield. Obviously, we ought to have a size limit. We ought to have a place limit. But it also, to me, the design ought to be when they submit for their sign, it at least, the temporary sign needs to be what that sign is that's getting approved. I mean, they're not going to open without, you don't want them coming in with this design for the permanent, but then they come up with this schlocky look that has nothing to do with their permanent sign. Because it can take months to get a permanent sign done. You'd like them to have their temporary sign looking like what the permanent one that got approved. And it should be included with the sign permit. Now, if you come in for a sales sign or going out of business, something weird that's not your permanent, going to be your permanent, it shouldn't be $196, in my opinion. It ought to be $50 or $100 because it's over the counter, and it shouldn't be, that's prohibitive. But what you guys have done is let you do the temporaries with your wrapped into your other application.
Right, and we waive that 196 counter fee. And then we do request the mock-up, and it does, the ones that we've approved at least, the ones that are not prohibited, are mocking what their permanent signage is.
Yep, yep, makes sense.
Yeah, all of that seems workable. And I think the big thing there is size, placement, time. Is that time, place, manner?
Same order. But and again, it's I think right now, our temp signs also is very limiting. And again, there's also things that we're not thinking about as special occasions. We have on occasion, we've had businesses come talk to us and ask for permission to do the anniversary.
Right.
Or if they're
That's what I
trying
was
to
thinking
advertise a
of.
special sale, and those type of things. And again, it's very, as one noted here, complicated. Yes, it is
Yeah.
complicated. But it doesn't have to be.
But the good thing is it's temporary. So there's a time that it can be complicated and you don't appreciate it 100%, but it's got to come down at some point.
Right, and again, how that looks and how that, in terms of processing is a whole different ballgame. A previous stop I've had, we had a temporary sign registration. It was a Google form. You gave us a photo and you told us the size and we emailed you your permit. Not too hard. It was free. Simply because it's a service to our businesses, because we want to encourage our businesses to do their best possible.
Tracy
Yeah.
has a question.
Opening a new business is about economic development. It's about economic joy to this community. Someone's coming to your community to open a business, spend a lot of money, put a lot of energy into that. If you haven't been a business owner sitting up here where you have had to make a payroll, look at everything, sometimes it's a little difficult as that sign comes up. When you end up thinking, my business, I want to put it here, I thought the courtyard might be good, and it ends up not being the best place because the traffic isn't good. This is truly about us changing our tone slightly of how we think about business and what we think about business. I think Aaron has had a business. I know Jack has had a business for a year. I don't know the rest of you. I apologize. But I'm saying this is about what we do and how we treat your customers. Your businesses are your customers. They are the city's customers. And you have to remember that. We were told at the chamber, we've had a sign for years, it was too big. Somebody was told to take it down on Copenhagen. The next person got to leave it up for almost 45 days till their sign came on Mission. It's something different for each person. We need to have the same, but remember, these businesses are your customers. They are the city's customers. We need to treat them with respect, and we need to kind of be a little more delicate and give them everything. And when you have code enforcement, it should be a teaching moment. It is not, let's beat them down, and it's not going to the principal's office. It is not teaching them that they got the truant officer to them, okay? We got to just be a little more gentle and a little more friendly to the business community. We've had businesses that have shut down because somebody couldn't paint their door pink and couldn't put out an A-frame sign. And the next person paints it yellow. We've just got to look at things a little better, guys, please. Thank you.
And it is-
Comment on the enforcement. I think, I can't remember her first name.
Jennifer.
Jennifer is doing, I think, a great job. She's extremely nice. I don't think you were picking on her, but we've had terrible enforcement in years past. She's, and you guys have made her full-time, I think, now or something. And she's there on weekends. She comes around. She's very pleasant to all of my tenants that have had run-ins with her, and she does contact me directly. So I know Tracy likes her too. I mean, she's a good person.
Yeah, I'm not saying that. I'm saying she shouldn't feel like when she's doing her job, she's made to feel bad by people because you're giving, it's like you get the speeding ticket. We all know when we get the speeding ticket, we were bad. And that's what it feels like to the business owner, and that's what I'm trying to say. Just make it more of an education. Here's all the rules. Here's the 48 pages. Sign off on it so you know it. We're going to take your sign next week if you don't have it down. We're just going to take it.
So
Should be taking
our,
things that are wrong.
our mantra with the city, at least since I've been here, is compliance, not enforcement. And Raphael carries that, Jennifer carries that. They give plenty of warnings, plenty of notice before the citation comes. It's not, shoot first and ask questions later. It's clearly that, and again, I think Aaron pointed that out. And again, what we did before I started here 2 years ago, I can't really talk about because I don't have knowledge, but we're definitely trying to handle it easier.
Yeah, we definitely are taking a different approach, and we are trying to take an educational approach go around in terms of how we do enforcement. And
Well-
certainly, we're always open to finding a way to get folks where they need to go in terms of their signage and ensuring that they're able to meet the code in some way, shape, or form.
I think too that sitting on the DRC, our goal is to get their approval as quickly as we can so that they can get their sign made and hung up. I think the most challenging situations are when they come in, they've already had their sign fabricated, it doesn't meet the specifications that are required. They're sure that that aluminum sign with the vinyl letters they rubbed on is perfect, and we understand that they've spent money on it. It is that education component so that they know what to expect, and that's part of why we're here too, is trying to really continue to define that.
Yeah, and I think a part of the problem, again, is communication, especially with temporary signs. As Tracy pointed out, I had a business in town for, 13 years. And we got dinged a couple times just because we didn't know that there was a regulation against what we were doing. We had no problem complying once we found out, but that's how we found out, is when somebody came, compliance officer came and said, no, you can't do this, and here's the regulation. And we, my wife especially, made a big effort when we started to find out what the rules were. And we still fell afoul of it. So I think we have to find a way to communicate, especially with new businesses, on what is and is not allowed. And I'm not sure that we actually know how to do that right now.
Well, I think one of the biggest stumbling blocks is that even when staff effectively communicates that, that the applicant says, well, what about that spot, they have it, another one here, because of the inconsistencies over the decades. And this group up here changes, and when 5 people go out and 5 new people come in, there's not a historical basis or a body of knowledge that sticks with it, especially when staff changes as well. So that's what makes it really difficult.
And that's why codifying more and more is better, because the institution is
Yeah.
bigger than us people, right?
Yeah.
I mean, it's got to last longer than if city council planners or DRC.
Exactly.
It has to.
The other
And
problem-
then it gives them the tools.
The other problem you run into is people don't comply, and we cite them, and they pay the citation, and they keep doing what they're doing. And people point at them and say, well, they're doing it. And then we explain, well, we can't talk about what enforcement steps we're taking, but just because somebody else is doing something they're not supposed to, doesn't mean you can't. And ultimately, a lot of our enforcement is actually complaint-driven. I mean, Jennifer's out on the street quite a bit, but a lot of things we discover are because somebody said, hey, what about that? So don't assume just because it's there, it's been improved either.
I think that's a good point for us to remember at the DRC too, is that you may be citing these instances, but that doesn't mean that those aren't already being, or there's actions being taken to remedy that.
We also, I'm going to play devil's advocate. I mean, these are adults that come in and open a business. They got to know, and all due respect to everybody, they walked the town. They looked at stuff. They walked around and went, wow, those are nice signs. Those are wood carved signs. There's not many awful signs in town that are up. And so, and I'm not going to compare it to another town, but I can go to a different town and go, I can see what that's obviously been allowed, and I can see Solvang has a unique character. Second most Christmassy town in America. We're pretty darn unique. And so they got some responsibility to open up a sign ordinance or go in and ask for the sign ordinance before they go make a sign with sticky yellow things on it and tack it up. So, I mean, they're not I know it's a teaching moment, but goodness gracious, they're also adults going into business.
Well, and I think one of the things that is my thing I tell a lot of applicants is, welcome to town with your new business. You selected to come here and open your business because you thought this was a place where you could be successful. It is in part because of what sets Solvang apart that brings all these people in. Help be part of that unique and special character. When you come in with something that's so outside of that aesthetic, then you're starting to dilute what makes Solvang Solvang. Help be part of that effort that lifts everybody up and makes us unique.
I just want to chime in. Most everybody here knows I was a general manager of a homeowners association before I came here. Whenever you buy into a homeowners association, you get a list of rules.
Correct.
CCNRs are called. I can't count. I don't think there's enough fingers and toes in this room to count the number of times people would get, quote unquote, in trouble for not following the rules, and it's in the code. And another thought I had is how many of us, whenever we get our new phone or new software, actually read the terms and conditions that are there. We get to the bottom line and we push the agree button and we go on our merry way. So as much as we want and try to communicate the rules, and even if we give them a thumb drive or a booklet,
They have some responsibility.
we're still going to have the same argument. One of the audience earlier commented about not communicating about this meeting. I have other experiences where I was on the TV, I was on the radio, I was quoted in the newspaper. We sent mailers, and still, when the event happened, when the effect of a fee increase happened, we had a room full of people going, "How come you didn't tell me?"
Right.
So, I spent 5 days at the county fair, for crying out loud, in a booth talking to everybody that came, and they still said they didn't know. So there's limits, Yes, can we do better? Absolutely. But at some point, like you said, you've got to take responsibility.
I do want to piggyback off Randy a little bit too, because when I do land use clearance for business certificates, I see that they're in the village or anywhere that would require DRC approval, I let them know that this can be a long process and that all signs do need to be approved by DRC before they go up. And when they ask for an application, I again reiterate that we have this 30-day review period, and then you go on the next meeting once your application is deemed complete. So we do try to communicate with applicants really well.
Do you provide them with a list, like a list of sign makers?
No,
No,
not allowed to.
no,
They could be biased.
yeah,
Okay.
But we do say, ask your neighbor or, go around town.
yeah.
Okay.
Find a sign you like and ask who did it.
Okay.
Yeah.
Got it.
So it sounds like the consensus is to go ahead and look at our temporary regs. I just want to just make sure with some head nods, no on the feather flags. I want to, yeah, okay.
But yes on the blow up.
Only in my office, is that allowed? I have one, so.
I do have a question for you, Raphael.
Yeah.
So in temporary signs, currently it appears that they've been considered for grand openings, perhaps going out of business. But a comment was made about St. Patrick's Day or something. Is staff going to consider allowing those?
Yeah, that would be folded in, again, because a lot of the stuff that's currently in the temp sign is content-based. And so you got to take those out and go back to the time, place, manner, where it's specific, where it's got to be a certain time frame connected to an action versus the holidays or other things. It can get very convoluted, so I don't really want to get into semantics. But that's what I'm hearing at this point is city staff, go ahead and revise the temp signs to allow a little bit more flexibility, but keep it at a time, place, manner.
I think so, and for my part, I think it'd be pretty easy to regulate how many opportunities a business has to put one up during the course of the year. That would be something I think easy to regulate and should be able to level the playing field.
I think we do it on sales, 1 or 2 a year, 3, don't we? It's not, I can't remember.
It's 4 a year.
4 a year.
Yeah, so, I mean, but again,
But I think that you have
How do you enforce it?
a really good point, Bill, there in that it can be limited without having to go into content or occasion by just the number of occasions you're allowed during the course of a calendar year.
Right. Yeah,
Yeah.
I mean, there's.
That makes sense.
Jurisdictions going to want a quarter, which is, and then define the quarter, obviously. And then some, and again, these are things that we need to flesh out as we go along, but just getting the basic direction, so. All right, moving on to the last topic, it is getting late.
Yes.
So, and this is one slide, and content-based regulation. So, I feel like I've beaten the dead horse here. So sign ordinance is currently content-based regulation. No ifs, ands, or buts about it. We talk about the allowance of neon signs for hotels, but we don't allow them for anything else. That's content-based. We talk about the fonts. That's content-based. We talk about the colors. That's content-based. So those things, it's basically the key questions we have to ask ourselves as staff. Does the ordinance language refer to content or the message of the sign? If it does, it's content-based. If not, is there evidence showing that the city adopted the regulation specifically because of the disagreement or agreement with the message expressed by the sign? Typically, we don't really want to get into that, but that more ties into non-commercial message signs. Those are if you're rooting for a certain candidate or a certain proposition, et cetera. So again, the sign ordinance amendments need to be clear on the reason and rationale and eliminating ambiguity, including wording as preferred or expected, or et cetera. So content-based comes in all shapes and forms, and non-objective is, do we want lighted signs? Yes or no? It's a simple question, because we can't have, oh, I'm a hotel, I'm allowed to have a, that's where we get into. Got to apply to everyone, straight to the board. And it makes life a lot easier, because it's an easy no, or an easy yes. Dimensionality is a big one. Dimensionality on signs. Do we want dimensionality? What is dimensionality? That could either be a pop-up of a logo or of the letters, have raised letters, or pop down or imprint of the raised letters to give that sort of handcrafted, carved look. But you can most certainly measure that, whether it's a ½ inch, 3/8, quarter of an inch, et cetera. That's objective, but it's not necessarily dipping into the content per se. So again, we're looking for content-based regulations, and last poll of the evening on this is a ranking one. So we're run with the ranking one and rank what we think is most important for objective design standards. Require dimensionality for logos and lettering. Require materials for types of signs. I know that we don't have that right now. If we don't want a metal sign, we'll say we don't want a metal sign. If we want a wood or faux-looking MDF sign, we're cool with that, because again, that's keeping with our brand. Eliminating all lighted signs, including neon. It's as simple as that, yes or no. Allow for lighted signs. Do we want to even go there and allow for the lighted signs? And what I'm talking by lighted signs is it backing, and it's menti.com, and put in the user code. If you want the letters to be lit. We've had a couple businesses that have recently opened up requesting that. And the DRC's really held the line there and said no, because it's an exception. And then allow for increase of signs due to location. Again, that is actually a town place manner. That is a big differential, because there is a fundamental difference between the village and being out near Alamo, Pintado, and Mission, because that's a whole different subset. But right now, our code doesn't talk about that. It does one singular, one size fits all. And that can also be, if it's a location that's got multiple tenants, it's the same thing. So again, just rank your order. As you can see, required materials, time types is first.
Timing out.
Oh, dimensionality came up. And then there's the other category. Am I missing something?
Mine's timing out again, so I can give you verbal.
That means that
I have a question.
eliminate all lighted signs.
Well, as in the code.
No.
No, yeah. I
No,
mean,
that means internally.
internally
lit.
illuminated. So, and sorry.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Oh, okay.
yeah.
Because
Yeah,
it says
not-
ultra lighted, and here it says,
Yeah.
don't have any lighted signs in the town?
Yeah, and
Yeah.
that's meant internally lit, because we
Yeah.
do have the ones that have the lights that downshine.
Right.
Correct, and
Yeah.
I think that's a very appropriate look for our village. But internally illuminated signs outside may be something we want to look at.
Right now, they've been consistently they're prohibited, and we've been real consistent at DRC. You had mentioned content of signs and words, but I believe that we are allowed to say that the sign needs to have the name of the business, and then, okay, I see you kind of, yeah, so can you fill us in, Mr. Attorney, as to what is allowed to regulate? Because we had an example earlier of the signs, and one of them was just a logo. But that wasn't the reason it wasn't compliant. It was because of the scale. We also have,
That was also a reason.
yeah, okay, it was, okay. Then we also have signs where it just says what the goods are that they're selling in the store. Smoothies and cones or whatever, gifts. And so what can be regulated? Are there any of those words that?
Well, I think you've heard Raphael say if you have to read the sign, that's a problem right there. If you have to interpret what's on there, it can be a content-based restriction.
Okay.
So you can talk about letter height, you can talk about typeface, you can talk about things that don't require you necessarily to read the message that's on the sign, because that gets you into trouble, because it can be content-based at that point. So that's a very broad brush of what you can. When you drill down into it, it's like, in another context, the objective design standards. If you come up with objective things that don't require you to interpret the message that's on the sign, those are the kinds of things that are reasonable time, place, and manner restrictions that you can enforce.
Now, you mentioned typeface, but we've been told font is not regulated, but you said typeface, so
Well,
I consider that one and the same.
Those terms are used interchangeably. There is a technical difference from a
Okay.
typesetting perspective. I always use typeface, but font is the common word on there.
Yeah.
If there are old style samples like you would use with a color palette, these are the type of typefaces or fonts that we believe best exemplify an old world Northern European or Danish character. So you wouldn't have Comic Sans on signs. That would be something that would not be consistent with that. But if there are other typefaces that you would take a look at from old pictures of Copenhagen, and you see that particular typeface, you can go to whatthefont.com, figure out what that typeface is closest to, and use that as a sample that might be acceptable for the typefaces that are set forth in the design manual.
Interesting, okay, because that does go counter to what we have, been informed over the past couple of
And
years.
that's because it says preferred, but doesn't provide an option.
Right.
And that's why I have city staff that said, you know what? I don't have an actual what is preferred.
Yeah.
So I don't want to go there.
Yeah,
Well,
'cause then it becomes a subjective standard in that
Right.
case, but
And I'm not sure that we even want to set that, because logos are, the business brand.
Yeah.
And do we want to go there? Some of my colleagues in the past have absolutely wanted to go there.
but that's kind of, yeah.
Some are corporate bound and we don't have.
Sure, and there are some that you may not want to get into that, as you say,
Yeah.
because then you're taking out of the hands of the applicant. But for example, there are some cities that have very strict sign codes, and they forced Target to stop using a red target, and they used
Yep.
kind of an off, like a brown color.
I've seen that back in.
And those kind of sign codes, because they use a specific color, they can enforce that, because that is a content neutral thing. Doesn't make the people at Target headquarters particularly happy about that, but if they wanted to go into that center, that is how they did it. So those are the kind of things that you have to think about. So if you think about it in terms of those objective design standards, where you're not looking at whatever the message is on the sign, then those are the kind of regulations that you might be able to put into place.
Well, and I
So
think,
colors are okay then?
so,
Restrictions?
right.
Yeah.
So I think,
As long as you specify what's acceptable.
Right.
If you did not
Or
want,
conversely-
neon Pantone colors, you
Right.
could say that.
Okay,
You
so
could say
that's what I was
Pantone
thinking.
3563 through 3597 are
Define
not
out,
permitted.
define in, yeah.
right, okay, so that you can actually do that. by defining it. And
But again, our existing code as it stands today does not
Doesn't.
do that. Which is why
Right.
City staff has erred on the side of liability to keep us out of, because you never know when one applicant just might say, you know what? I'm gonna sue you.
but we are looking at.
But we're talking about changing
redoing
the
it.
code here.
Yeah.
Let's change it.
Yeah, yeah, so I'm looking forward here as we put together these design guidelines, and I know that there was a recent sign that came in, and it was their corporate colors, and it's
Yes.
pretty bright orange, and if there had been an option, I would have loved to have seen them kind of become a little more earthy orange to fit within our,
And remember, it's always easier, it's always easier to tell what you don't want to see.
Right.
yes,
And
I know.
versus boxing a business creativity on this is the only way.
understood.
Whereas if we don't want to see any neon or, colors or
Right.
pastels, et cetera, I'm just throwing out pastels. If we don't want to see cosmic sands or other sandsy,
Fonts, yeah.
then we can specify that. But currently, like I said, as it stands today, we don't have that. So that's why city
Well,
staff has erred
Esther,
on that.
and you asked about the menu signs that say blenders of this or this. Aren't we limited to 3 descriptive words on our signs? And is that objective enough? It's not?
Not.
Well, it's not being applied, for sure,
Right.
so.
So again,
So
that,
we can just keep.
which is why it would morph into a
Menu
a
board.
business sign that gives a total 10 square feet, must be affixed next to your front door, and maximum, again, now that starts to morph. Now that gives you the ability, okay, you want a menu sign, as long as it meets this criteria and letter height, have fun. But
Well,
I'm not
wouldn't-
reading the sign.
But then conversely, what if that sign by the front door that's permanent on the wall has basically a menu on it? Because we have places
Again,
like that.
That's
Content,
which is
not regulated,
not
or
supposed to be.
being,
We're not
we're
supposed
not
to be.
able to regulate. Yeah,
shouldn't be. And again, that's littered throughout the code.
yeah.
And menu, trust me, menu was the first one that jumped out, and I get why, and I get why you want to do that. But there's a much more simplistic way to say, okay, if you want that type of signage or give a business owner some leverage, then box them into square footage, time, place, manner.
Size of the letter.
Yeah, yeah, which is what there's a lot of,
Right.
but needs more
There
improvement.
was another bullet point you had up there that talked about size of sign depending on location. And I've thought about this a lot. We have our wall sign, hanging sign, under canopy signs, all of them are 7 square feet. And it doesn't matter if you are a huge, and you get a minimum. So you can be a little tiny shop and have a 7. You can be a big building like the Copenhagen House and only get 7 square feet. Seems like, now then you ask for an exception to you guys and say, well, can't we go bigger because my building's bigger? And I get that, but it seems like there should be some way, we allow a ground sign and a pole sign depending on lineage, that there's some way that you folks could allow larger signs if you were that much large.
Or more, and we did an exception
But
last
but
meeting.
more is 7, you can have 10 7 square feet signs. We'd rather probably have you have 2 14-foot signs on some big building, than having just a bunch of mass. So that's something I wish we'd look at in our ordinance at some point, because we haven't changed it at all. And they're not all small, little, tiny buildings any longer.
And there's a way to do that, and that's typically, most municipalities do it based on what's called linear square footage.
Yeah.
So your size of your sign, your wall sign increases as you have a larger frontage.
Yes.
And then there's a minimum size or a max sign if you
Everybody
have
gets- Yep.
less than X amount of square feet. So that's something that, thanks to the wizardry of computers these days, I could tell you what the average lot size is in the village, and then
Well-
derive something from there.
And we do have that. We have a minimum,
Yeah.
what you're going to get. We only go 7, and then we jump it to a ground or a pole.
Right.
At 50 or 100, which
Well-
is a big leap, from just going to a 12 square foot wall sign. You got to go to a 50 square foot pole sign,
So
or not
Aaron,
at all.
What we've seen, Aaron, more commonly isn't that that it's a business that wants a bigger sign, but rather that a business that has quite a length of linear feet that has multiple doors and wants, and even if the doors don't open, and that was what was at the case at the last meeting. So they wanted a sign kind of along the linear footage, and they did get an exception to add an additional sign so that it kind of, each door had a sign added. And I have to admit, I voted against that because that, again, it's that exception that sets a new standard.
And again, it's also the idea of allowing businesses, again, I go back to business owners know what they think is best for their business. And so giving them a box to say, okay, this is your linear footage, this is the max amount of square feet you have for signage, you figure it out. And whether it's a projecting sign, whether it's a wall sign, whether it's a sign on an awning, but it all counts towards the same end. And eventually, you're going to max out somewhere, which means you got to start giving and taking. And that's ultimately the business owner to figure out, not us. As
And maybe maybe instead of having the 4 7-foot signs, that person would have wanted 2 12-foot signs, and it wouldn't have looked so cluttered, and it would have been better for him, better for the town. And we don't even allow that, it's 7 square feet. I guess you can ask, can I go to 7.5 square feet? But you better make a finding on why.
I think that's
That would be,
So we don't
that would
even
be
allow
my desire would be to see you have a maximum square footage based on the frontage, if that's the formula you choose to use, and whether you have 2, whether you have 1. There's a way to manage that and stay within the restrictions that you're trying to deal with and be fair to the business owner.
Yeah.
I think so.
Yeah,
too.
I think that's an interesting concept, and then, of course, having limitations, you can't just have one gigantic
Right.
sign
You have a
that
max.
Takes, have only one that takes all the square footage.
The other one that we talked about is relocated signs.
Yes.
It's on the same property, and you move it from here, and you move it to the other side of the door, and you have to come in. Some of this should be done over the counter, and perhaps you've been doing that, I don't know, but that was always an issue.
We have not. And again, it's very specific in our code that relocated signs
Are new signs.
are new signs. Now,
Seems
I'm
silly, but.
again, I'm of the vein that if it's already seen once and you're just moving it from one location to another, I should be able to clearly be able to approve it. I mean, it's
Same
not,
color, same
if
everything.
it's,
Well-
everything is the same.
So here's the yes, but, and this comes to mind because of the inconsistencies over the years with how the signs have been approved. If you could say that it all been consistent, equitable, and, there hadn't been exceptions right, left, up, and down, then yeah, for sure, that sounds like, and I don't know how to discern, I guess it's like if the sign is compliant with the current codes, then, staff should be able to do it.
You're saying you have a sign that was approved, maybe
Like-
through an exception 10
And
years
it's
ago. Now you pick it up
internally
and move
lit.
it.
And again,
I got you.
codes change, and which is why, it's like we tell people that come to the counter today, and they said, well, I couldn't have done this addition 2 years ago. What's changed? The code changed. It's a new day. I can't tell you what happened in the past and transpired in the past, but I can most certainly tell you what happens and how to do it today. And I think that's okay.
Well, couldn't you just do relocated signs as long as they meet the current code then?
Yes.
To
Yeah.
Rafi's point.
Yeah, yes. To me, that would be the caveat. That was the yes, but.
I got you. We'll add that in there.
All right.
Raphael?
Yeah.
Question.
That's the first question. It's kind of like, I should have locked yesterday on a rate,
Yeah.
Which I refinanced 4 years ago.
Right.
So those are it changes, so I understand where you're coming from. First, I'm gonna go off script a little bit. I wanna thank everybody that's been here. You guys are protecting the brand of Solvang and strategically working with the minutia we get from the state. I appreciate that more than you know. And so does everyone else, all the other residents, and you make it that unique place that we all love and call Solvang. And get rated at the second best business town in the world, or U.S. But on behalf of myself and the other council members that are here, thank you. the reason we're here, or for myself anyway, get the background and the discussion of what it takes, so when we have that come to our council, we have a better handle of making an informed decision by being part of the discussion. So thank you so very much for all you do, and on behalf of myself, my colleagues in the city, we more than appreciate it. So with that, I'm gonna say goodbye, because I've got a 5 a.m. wheels up air flight tomorrow. Thank you.
Dennis, you had something? You had something?
No, I was saying.
Oh, all right. Well, I think I got a clear sort of from everybody. If anyone else has something to add, I'll be happy. But it sounds like we're looking to be a little bit more flexible with our signage, so look into flexibility, look into colors and fonts potentially of what we don't want to allow instead. But ultimately, in the end, this would need to be fleshed out, again, with direction from the council, but would need to be fleshed out, not only with the DRC and the planning commission, but the business community as well, and particularly.
I do have one comment on lighted signs.
Yeah.
I couldn't find it in here, but somewhere it said that lamps with low lumens are preferred. That's obviously not objective.
And that's.
So we need to specify not only the lumens, but I think the color temperature as well.
Agreed.
And that definitely could, because we don't want what is it, so you want the soft yellow, but you don't want the.
Right, so you want 2,700 Kelvin,
Yeah,
3,000
right,
Kelvin,
instead of
something like
Not
that.
5,000.
Not
yeah.
daylight bright.
And Jack, tying onto that, we had it's not a sign, but we had to put it in here somewhere, the white lights.
Yeah, agreed.
See,
The
because
string
they're starting to
lights.
do the string lights and the white lights, and some are blue and some aren't, and some are like yellow. We ought to be
And
thinking
some
about,
are
because that's part of the
flashing
design.
and
Yeah.
some are multicolored.
And I don't mean Christmas, they're year
Yeah,
round. Yeah.
that's right.
So we'll add that to the list of flavors.
And where those can be hung too,
Yeah.
on the building.
So quickly, is everybody good? Well, first off, thank you, everybody.
We're all
for coming. I
our
appreciate
brains
it.
are full.
No more
Stomach's
questions.
empty.
So our next steps are to take it to city council for further direction on the separate work efforts. Randy's working to clone me at this point. So looking forward to that. But with that being said, again, thank you, and thank you guys to attending. And that's all I got.
Don't run off just yet. Raphael,
Well, I
I'm
haven't
still
closed
on
the
here.
meeting yet.
But I did see in the comments from the survey, one of the respondents had talked about an adjacent business having something that had, like a witch or something that made a lot of noise. And I know while it's not a sign, it does interfere with an adjacent business, and it's something perhaps that should be looked at for future regulation about. I recognize we have the karaoke bar and so forth, and you don't want to limit them too much, but if a business is interfering with an adjacent business, it should be addressed.
Okay, thanks for the heads up.
Yeah,
Well,
even if
and-
it is Halloween.
My last comment is, if it goes straight to city council, and we look at it 3 days before, and then we're gonna come to city council and we're gonna have a workshop, because we might say, I think we ought to have, I'd like to see us have one more meeting to just
Yes.
look at what you guys
Absolutely.
come up with
The-
before.
The idea is to actually just get direction to go, and then come back with,
Direction
to go forward. And that gives us the city staff, yes, we want you to work on this as a part of our council goals. Then we go work at it, and we bring it back in chunks. All right.
Yeah.